And that was the only statement for 3 weeks. So we were inundated with calls, but also from alumni, from parents, from donors, and also for students. Because people wanted to know that their distress being shared in the home after October. Can you not hear me? All right.
No, they can. I just, Paul wanted to hear your talks.
Oh, okay. I'm recording. Okay. So I want to just say that part of what I am sharing with you today is part of my new research, which grew out of all the questions I received from alumni and donors after October 7th of why Columbia? Why are things so out of control at Columbia? And we can talk about that because a lot of what happened, I don't want to focus mostly on the last 2 years because I'm a historian and I'm much more comfortable 100 years ago, right? But what I'm going to actually speak about today is for all of us to think about, and I love there are so many people from higher education here, the system that Columbia created in the early 20th century to deal with the overwhelming number of overqualified Jewish students who were seeking admission, forced them to change the process of admission, which was then adopted by all of higher education in America. The notion that we have quotas for people from different regions, different socioeconomic groups, different backgrounds, it is all based in the fact of how Columbia dealt with this question. I call it diversity. I know we're not supposed to say that so much, but the understanding that there are different groups. And this is what we're going to be talking about today. It all came up because of what happened, the questions I had from alumni in particular. Did Columbia really have a separate college for Jews in Brooklyn? And it was researching because I didn't know the answer. So I went back to the archives. So I'm now going to talk about Columbia University. And I think it's important just to understand that Columbia from its inception is different from other Ivy League institutions, right? The oldest university is Harvard. It is founded by Puritans and for Puritans. Okay, so religion is extremely important. You have to have one ideological approach to Christianity was to train ministers, while Columbia, which was founded by the king in 1754, but then rechartered by the state of New York in 1783, was to represent all the denominations in New York City. So its first board of trustees has a Jew on it, Gershon Mendes Seixas, the head of the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue. It is the first Ivy League synagogue to have a Jewish member of the board of trustees. So I started there. This is the last we're going to talk about, the 18th century, for us to understand that there are many different relationships for understanding Columbia's relationship with Jews. But I show Low Library. Hold on.
Before you jump there,
Yeah.
when it was founded, was it a state university?
It was called King's College. In Hamilton.
No, the second time when you said it was,
So yes, it's called Columbia University in the city of New York.
because like I know Cornell is kind of like has some parts of
It's land
of
grant.
it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it is not. So we're going to talk about Columbia is always privately funded,
That's okay.
but you need all educational institutions need to be chartered by the state, right? And this is as a new state. So when New York State makes it, they make it very clear up front, there is not one denomination in New York. And I think this background of New York City is something I want us to keep in our back of our minds because New York City changes over the course of the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, and understanding how those changes, how an institution responds to those changes is very important. Because what I'm going to discuss with you, right, the approaches it takes to this whole process of how you get into Columbia was not inevitable. And we have to understand they're created in specific historical moments, right? And understanding those specific historical moments are important. And I'm only going to do this for a minute. It's really important. And I talk about this all the time, and from starting last night. Columbia was not the only university that had protests. Columbia was the most covered because it is in New York City, where all the press is, and it also had a new president who was not American, right? Who did not maybe understand American higher education and understand how to run a university in the same way. And we can talk more about it. But I want to just say that what I'm going to talk about today about Columbia is just thinking through Columbia about American higher education. And Columbia was not the only place that had protests against what was going on after October 7th that were both seen as anti-Israel and anti-Semitic. But it is important just to understand it in this context, all right, as one. And that's what I'm going to be using it as an example to think through. So we have to go back, all right? So Columbia, if anyone has ever been there, has only been at its campus now location since 1896. It is built. It moves, right? Its first place is in Trinity Church. Hamilton has been a big help to teaching the history of Columbia. It's first in Trinity Church because Columbia is also about training ministers and training young men like Alexander Hamilton for public service, right? It goes from Trinity Church to Midtown to Morningside Heights. It's not Morningside Heights. It used to be, and this is my favorite part, it used to be an insane asylum. It's called the Bloomingdale Insane Asylum, and they moved out of the city and they sold the land to Columbia. It tells you a lot about Columbia. That's a say. But what's important just to be thinking about when Columbia moved from its Midtown campus uptown, a decision is made. It is called Columbia University in the city of New York. And the head of it, Seth Lowe, who I'm going to show you a picture of. Oops, sorry. This is all the moves. You can see it from New York. It did not have highways and bridges at the time, but sorry about using Google Maps, not 8. Seth Lowe. Okay, the main building is called Lowe Library because Seth Lowe is the president. Well, he's on the board of trustees of Columbia and then becomes the president between 1890 and 1902. And he leaves in 1902 to become the mayor of the city of New York. And before he is president of Columbia, he's the mayor of Brooklyn. And I think we have to know in New York City history, Brooklyn was the 5th largest city in the nation until 1898, when the great mistake of 98 was joining New York City with the 5 boroughs, according to Brookall. So it's important to understand he's the mayor of Brooklyn, becomes the president of Columbia, and then the mayor of New York City. He is a person committed to New York City. So what I wanted to say is Columbia has to be understood within the context of the history of New York City that is transformed in 1898, right? From being Manhattan, which was the largest city, to a mega metropolis by having the 5 boroughs consolidated together. And this is also the time in which New York City is also being transformed by migration. Migration primarily from Central and Eastern Europe, but primarily Eastern Europe. Between 1880 and 1920, New York City goes from a home of 80,000, has 80,000 Jews in 1880, and in 1920, it has 2 million. Okay? Jews, but I want to just put this, New York City is growing also immensely. So the 2 million Jews who call New York City home in 1920 make up 35% of the population. So the city has exploded. But what is very important to remember is as they are coming in, every group that comes to America has with them their own tradition, beliefs, and thoughts. Immigrant Jews, more than any other immigrant group, will graduate high school. They make up 50% of New York City public school graduates and pursue higher education more than any other group in New York City. So this then becomes the conundrum, okay, for Columbia. Columbia is established in 1783 to train the Protestant elite of the city, whether it is to be ministers or other types of leaders. The people graduating, right, starting, let's just say in 1910, right, are overwhelmingly immigrant Jews. And the question is, how is Columbia going to respond? So the process for admission, anyone know what the process for admission to the Ivy League was around 1900? A test in Latin, Greek, the classics. You have to be able to handle the work at Columbia. So it literally tested you that you could handle what Columbia would be teaching. And if you scored above a 97, you would get it. All right. So that's the way people entered college up until 1917. But it is very, very important just to understand that the Board of Trustees of Columbia see New York being transformed. And they also see their application pool being transformed and the students on campus. Who was actually on campus? Because it's just who does well on this one test. That's how you get it. So this is from the Board of Trustees, okay? Pines, John Pines is a member of the Board of Trustees, and I'm just going to read part of it, all right? And this is what I just try to have you see. This is, this is the way we used to keep notes. I have no idea how they're going to record this moment. And as I said, we're living in this inflection point. All the emails and WhatsApps and the way we all communicate with each other. So Pines says this. I want to put on record some thoughts which I've been taking shape in my regard to what threatens to become one of our most dangerous problems, the Hebrew question. So, what it is, when a college was founded and a question of whether it should be Episcopalian or it should be a non-sectarian institution, the bitterness which grew out of the dispute lasting for more than 70 years is mainly responsible for the lack of support and the lack of influence from which the college suffered. So, the Episcopal Church is actually based at St. John the Divine, which is right next to the Episcopal Church of America. But it's important to understand that Columbia is seen by its trustees as a religious institution. All right. And what is, I'm sorry, I'm just going to skip that. But it is becoming a question of whether Columbia shall be in the future a Christian or a Hebrew institution. And in my judgment, they're greatly to blame in not recognizing the issue is not meeting it by an assertion of a bedrock principle on which the college was founded. You know as well as I that we are in danger of being overwhelmed by the number of Jewish students who are now coming to us, and who are certain to increase in number. We have neither the legal nor the moral right to exclude them or to discriminate against them, but we can assert and emphasize the character of the university as a Christian institution. So the issue he suggests is bringing in that chapel becomes required, which it does, and certain ways of studying Bible study. So making it a more Christian institution. But this is where confronting the problem which is before us, we must see that we cannot keep the Jews out, but we can bring Christianity in by establishing one or more chairs in the evidences of Christianity at like subjects. And I'm going to just go on. I believe interpose the most effective check to increasing Hebrew influence and to the other repeated assertion that Columbia is a Jew college. All right. This is Columbia's big fear, that it is being associated with Jews or Jew college. And people should understand Jew is an insult. To call someone a Jew is not, it is used in this period in 1902. If you call someone a Jew, you're making many other assumptions about them vis-a-vis their relationship to money. It's not meant as a complimentary. So Columbia does not want to be seen as a Jew college. But what is very interesting about this source, it's not about limiting Jews coming in. It's about changing the curriculum. So the first response of Columbia is not about exclusion. It's about thinking about curriculum and how we change what we teach to influence who comes. So that's 1902. All right. Over time, and we have to just understand that New York City is being transformed in this period, and Jews have particular political beliefs, particularly East European Jews. The Democratic Socialist Party of America, we must remember, was founded by Morris Hillquit, a Russian Jew, right? So they are seen as being politically out of sync with the Protestant elite who make up the Board of Trustees of Columbia. This is another, I'm trying to race through a lot from 1913. This is a member of the Board of Trustees writes to the head of the Board of Trustees. In character, the Jews, they are terribly persistent. They realize that they have been 2,000 years of more prejudice against them, and they are always seeking special privilege for themselves and their people. They have retained their special calendar. Their holidays differ from those of everybody else, and they want these holidays recognized generally, and in some cases, believed by law. They form the worst type of immigrants. They supply more leaders to the anarchists, socialists, and other movements of unrest. And in the recent election, the socialist vote was confined largely to the East Side. That's the Lower East Side. That's where Jews are known, the Jewish community, and to Brownsville and Brooklyn, where they live. All right. So the reason now I'm just putting this up, how is this different than the other text? This is a question. The first text, how are Jews constructed? Why is it fearful that it's their political beliefs or who they are in society as a group rather than them just not being Christian. The first text is that they are not Christian. This is about who they are in society in New York. All right. So then all of this explodes in 1917. Okay. So in 1917, as we know, the United States enters World War I. And all good patriots, there's a draft. You have to join the army, right? This is a picture of military operations on Columbia's campus, all right? That practicing for military, you see they're lining up, all right? Columbia University students drill. At the time in 1917, the student body is expected to be 25% Jewish, all right? There is massive political upheaval, particularly because most of the Jewish students are pacifists, socialists and pacifists against the war. And this young man is the first person expelled from Columbia for his political beliefs. Okay, so he gives, it's after the semester is over in 1917. He gives a talk at a rally with Emma Goldman saying that you should not register for the draft. You know, we should all be against the dollar war. We shouldn't fight for the American Kaiser. Total socialist pacifist. And literally the next day he's informed that he must leave Columbia. That's Leon Sampson. I always like this picture because he literally, look at him. He's a little boy. Okay. These two other gentlemen, Charles Phillips and Owen Cattell. Owen's father is actually a professor at Columbia, and he actually gets fired. They are both indicted by federal agents for passing around a petition of people, of students and other men in New York who are against the draft. And that is seen as sedition. So they are indicted, and then they are defended, right? Students are found guilty of fighting a draft. They are defended by Morris Hillquit, who is the Russian Jewish founder of the Socialist Party of America, and he's also a lawyer. And he actually gets them, they don't have to serve prison time. But it's really important to understand Morris Hillquit is literally on campus all the time. Right? He is meeting with students, helping him run for Congress. He then runs for mayor in 1917. I hope this is Morris Hillquit, the socialist lawyer, is leading counsel for the defense. I can't stress enough how socialism is seen as a threat to the ideals of American society in this time. All right, so it's important. This is seen as antithetical to what it means to be a good American. Students have mass meetings. Three professors are fired for their outspoken pacifism, right? This is when, the AAUP is founded in this era for understanding about free speech of professors, right? That they can speak their ideals. But it is total chaos at Columbia. This is what I'm trying to say, that, 2024 is no different than 1917. All right. And that's Sampson's friends. They have protests. Hillquit comes to campus. There's riots. Sorry, I'm just going to go. But this is what I love. So Hillquit then, after he defends, this is all in 1917, runs for mayor. And when he runs for mayor, it is seen as that if a socialist wins, he's against the war, right? Socialists are against the war. If he wins, it is an indictment of America joining the war. And New York City is the largest city in the United States. So everyone in Europe, that's what the cartoon on the New York Times is watching, who is going to win the mayoral election of 1917. Hillquit does not win, but it is important to understand as a symbol, he is seen as a threat to America. And this pushes the trustees. No more open admissions, no more taking tests. We are going to start interviewing people. We are going to start having what we would call quotas, but they would say regional, right? And what they meant by regional is if you were from New York, you got an interview. We'll put it that way. They wanted to limit the types of people that were on campus because they did not want to be seen, as we heard in that primary source, as the Jew college. They definitely didn't want to be seen as the socialist college, the Jewish socialist college. All right. So what we get is starting in 1917, they have a new form. So when you apply to Columbia, you put your name down, you put your parents' names down, your parents' birthplaces down, and your parents' occupations down. Okay? And in addition, you have an interview if you're from New York. If you are not from New York, you do not need an interview. All right? That's one. But then I love this. There's, this, it's not only all the colleges are talking about what are we going to do with all these students who are applying, and they mean, you're right, who are doing so well on the test, and we don't want to let that in. So this is the head of admissions at Columbia who's writing to the head of admissions at MIT for what they're doing at Columbia. All right. And there's just the one line. He says that presently there's 20% in the class are Jewish students, and we're trying to get it down to 15. But I want to just read this one paragraph. And I wonder do we have, okay, the PS, because it is such an interesting understanding of what I call diversity. Okay. On reading this letter, I think that there is one additional remark I ought to make. When a man is responsible for the development of an institution involving as it does traditions and a heritage which may have required decades to develop, it is certain that he bears a very heavy responsibility to his institution and to the community. He has no right to take steps that will destroy the value of the institution. For instance, if 1,000 men from France should present themselves to Columbia College for admission and were better qualified to pass our entrance exams than young men from our normal clientele, and just think about that, normal clientele, I should feel that some steps ought to be taken so that it may be impossible to admit them all. It would be so modify the work that we are trying to accomplish, and that in a short time the work of 150 years would largely be undone. The same kind of remark may be made in regard to Jews, colored people, and other groups which are more or less distinctive. We ought to be glad to have as many of each kind as in our judgment the institution can stand, but to say that there should be no limit to the number of men of a given type who may present themselves to college seems to surrender on the part of the administration of one of the most important responsibilities that they bear. I just want to let that sit. Okay? People's thoughts. Yes.
If if you were to say that today, you would get fired.
Okay.
Well, at least hopefully.
Okay.
Well, it's just interesting in the changing definitions of merit or merit.
Excellent. And what constitutes what you want the university student body to do? Right? What the university student, I mean, there's so much you can talk about. The comparison with, sorry.
Oh, well, I think it's one of the moments to ask them, what is the purpose of higher education? And so they're defining what their purpose is. It's obviously very different from what Dr. Pro says. The purpose of higher education is here at this university and in this moment, but certainly I think public universities often call into question the private or elite schools that are kind of existing to perpetuate their own eliteness or their own vision of what they should be educating about versus who they should be.
Excellent. But I think that what you raise is your mission and who you educate are linked, right? And I always just point out the comparison he makes is to French, right? A foreign, right? Jews, and I'm sorry to use his word, color, they're citizens. We're talking about American citizens. But the group he uses is a group that is clearly a foreign group. So he is constructing these groups as foreigners, even though they're in clearly part of America. Yes.
And I guess echo the discussion for civil rights years later.
This is 1922. We want to just remember the time and place. But I just want to be showing you evolution. This is all happening at Columbia. This is the discussion that is taking place. Yes.
But isn't this happening also at Harvard and MIT and Princeton and all of those other places?
Excellent. So that is it is happening in about all these elite institutions, but I want to just say, why do they write at the beginning? Why Columbia? They write to Columbia because Columbia is the first to deal with it, because New York City, and I should have said this early, is the densest urban concentration of Jews anywhere in the world throughout history. There are the 2 million Jews living in New York is more than any other place in the world. So Columbia is dealing with issues that other universities are not dealing with. And then they look to Columbia for advice. This is advice, models. Harvard has a totally different, right, model because Harvard has dormitories for all its students, right? Columbia is dependent on commuters. I said that in the beginning. When they moved to Morningside Heights, they do not build dormitories. They only build for 1/3 of the students because they believe New York City is part of the education. You go through New York before class and think about things differently in your classroom, and after class, you go back through New York. And by traveling through New York, you think about everything you learned in different ways. That's why it's Columbia University in the city of New York. That makes them dependent on commuters. And who are the commuters who want to come? Jewish immigrants. And who are the qualified? Jewish immigrants. And they don't know what to do. This is the issue. So it's an interesting, there was a planning in 1890 to not build dormitories for an ideological, right? The city should be part of your education. In many ways, this transformation of the city is something that the Board of Trustees and then the administration, this is the head of admissions, don't know how to address. Okay, so I'm going to just go. So what I'm writing on is the Board of Trustees, and now this is another theme of the book. Columbia wants to be the biggest university with the most students in the United States. Okay, so Columbia has 17 schools. There are 3 undergraduate schools and 14 graduate programs that make up Columbia University. That is a lot of the pandemonium, right? So there's 17 deans at Columbia and 1 president. It's unruly for the best. So part of this is they make a junior college, Seth Low Junior College in Brooklyn. They rent 2 floors. This is Brooklyn Law School. They rent 2 floors of Brooklyn College. And what Seth Low Junior College is the place that people are sometimes sent to if after their interview, they are seen as not appropriate to come to Morningside Heights. Their most famous person is Isaac Asimov. People know who, the science fiction writer, who his first time that he traveled from Brooklyn into Manhattan, he has an interview. He's told, you're not going to come to Columbia, but you should go to Seth Low Junior College. And once they come to Seth Low Junior College, they realize where they are because they realize that every other person, it's 85% of the students, all right, are Jewish. It is the same tuition as Columbia, same curriculum as Columbia, but the student body is reflective of who actually lives in Brooklyn. And it is part of Columbia's strategy to grow, right? These are very eager students. They want degrees, but they don't get bachelors of arts. They don't get BAs. They only can get bachelors of science. And many of them go there because they're pre-med. 2/3 of the students at Seth Low Junior College, and there are 500 at its max, are pre-med. Okay?
It's not like a junior college how we understand it because they were degree granted.
So, excellent. So this is the question. The question is, there are degree granting over time. Many people leave they apply many times to medical college until they could get in. Junior colleges are created in the early 20th century as an understanding that we need more forms of education. And this is Columbia weighing in on it, but they have created it for one group. And I want us just to be thinking about, there are questions we still talk about. Testing, who gets access, who doesn't get access. These are all questions which are still with us today, right? It's not only exclusive. So, sorry, Stan, I do digital mapping. And so this is a mapping of where all the students in the class of 1931 are from, right? So they're all this is, if you don't know New York, they're basically from Brooklyn. Either they're from Brooklyn, a little bit from Manhattan, or from the South Bronx. Right. And there's a few out, this is Long Island, this is kind of, Far Rockaway, and some from New Jersey. Did I do that? Okay. The important thing to understand is the group knows, right, who everyone is, that they're all Jewish, but they are all phenomenally smart. So in the 1930s, there was an exam, right? Seth Low emerges first in an examination give throughout the nation to sophomores in 138 liberal colleges. So I shouldn't say, there isn't the SATs in this time. It's called the Thorndike test. There is a test given to all liberal arts colleges, seeing what they're teaching and what skills the students have. So the Seth Low students know that they're smart, right? They came number 1. Yes.
Clear scores higher than the Steves.
Yes. And actually what is fascinating, if you look at, this is their newspaper, they often compete, right? They have no resources. And I should just say, they are not a well-resourced school, but they do have a chess team. And they do have a debate team, and those always win. And their basketball team never wins. But it's important that they're competing with all the schools in New York, and they understand that they're under resourced, but there are certain areas that they are highly skilled in.
Do they have a separate library?
They have no library. And actually, the most interesting thing, and this is I'm in process, is that to do all the pre-med requirements, there isn't labs. So they have to actually travel. And I should say, to travel from Brooklyn up to Columbia takes at that time an hour and a half on the subway. So they have to travel. So students often write that they switch out. One, he wrote that he switched to Ohio State because it's just much easier. Everything was on one campus. He didn't have to travel like 3 hours every day just to take his requirements. But this is, I'm just going to read. All right. So this is part of what I've been researching is understanding how medical education changes. So it used to be that you would just apply to medical school if you had, even in high school, taken enough science classes. And after 1910, there becomes what we know as pre-med requirements. And then over time becomes the notion that you have to have the way we understand medical school applications today. There's a recommendations and right. So the way the recommendations worked is you would rank everyone in the class that is applying to a certain school, right? And then send it to the school. So this is from Seth Low Junior College. And I'm just going to read you, I'm not going to read through every names, but I think it's just important to understand what type of, like, to get a sense of the feeling. Okay. So, dear Dean Harvey, a number of the boys have asked me to write you concerning their desirability as medical students. Two, Morris Craftman and Meyer Marishkin are the best, and I'm just going to skip down. The other are middle. Edwin Levitin has shown consistent interest in medicine, although his school record is mediocre. He feels very confident that he can do well and assures me if he's accepted in Chicago, he would adequately justify his acceptance. I'm inclined to believe him. Said he would. The last man, Louis Ritterban, is a supercilious kike. For the outstanding personalities and well-rounded boys whose grades I think reflect their ability, I strongly recommend Workman and Zeller. Okay. Using the term supercilious kike in a recommendation, he knew immediately it would doom him. All right. He got into no medical schools in America. Louis Ritterban is the class president. All right. He is in the top half of the class. And it is clear. Well, I'm now going to talk about my theory. Okay. The spelling of his name is how you would spell his name in Polish. It's a Polish. So he is a very recent immigrant, and I looked it up in the census. He arrives. He's not American born. He clearly had an accent, right? He's not a native born student. But this is what I am trying, as I look through on this project, to think through. If this happens in a recommendation letter, I wonder what happened in the classroom. And that's what I am, right? We all think when we write recommendation letters, right? And the notion that this would appear, and the person writing it clearly knew what he was doing, right? Gives you a sense of why this is a very short-lived school. Because 2/3 of the students are pre-med and none of them are getting into medical school, right? And it drops, and that has something to do with the larger understanding what's going on in medical schools that are also having quotas that they're very open about. But applying from a school where they know that every student is Jewish, right? And they're trying to limit, and they're being insulted by their own instructors. And this person, one of the few perks, I guess, of working at Columbia is I'm allowed to request their transcripts. And he's pretty, he did pretty well. He didn't do well in the there's all these humanities classes that are required, but he did pretty well. So this is what I've been doing, and this is now my favorite document. There is a list at the end before it closes. This is from 1935 of non-Jewish students at Seth Low College in the Columbia archives. So they asked the dean to mark who he thought was non-Jewish. And look at this. I have starred the one that I think to be Anglo-Saxon. All right. So this, I've actually talked with the historian of Columbia. He understands this document is that enrollments in Columbia itself have dropped, and they're trying to think of how to fill the class, but they definitely don't want to fill the class with Mr. Louis Ritterban, right? They want to fill the class with people who they quote their normal clientele. And I think that gets back to your normal. What is normal clientele? is the big question when you think of mission higher education. All right. This is now about the history of Columbia. I think I'm going to stop here because if you have, I just put out a lot of stuff. And if you have questions, just to ask. Yes. Stan.
Yeah, well, first of all, this is a defense of Jewish basketball. The CCNY team in the 1950s dominated, and they were
1930s.
1930s maybe, but a Jewish basketball team did dominate New York City in the 50s.
Yes.
So my question is actually about the letter to MIT in 1922. So I'm wondering, like, just 2 years after that, there's a national quota on immigration by the Harding administration. So I'm wondering if there's a broader context. It speaks to a broader context of anti-immigrant sentiment or specifically anti-Jewish sentiment.
Right. So I think that I think it's very important to be thinking about all of this. That's why I started off, right? Why Columbia? Columbia must be part of American culture, and you are correct. Understanding who gets into elite institutions, what that means, who gets in. I mean, this is what I see this letter being. If we want to continue our elitism, we have to make sure that only certain people are here and other people are not here, right? Which is, right, anathema to, Stan mentioned City College, to public universities. Public universities at the time in the 1930s were free. In New York, it was free City College, all right? And this was $400, which is a lot of money, all right? $400. So it's important just to be thinking about how xenophobia, right, how it plays out in higher education reflects in some ways the larger culture around it. And that's exactly right. There are larger questions of not only who do we want in our institutions, right, but who do we want in our country, right? So I relate it to all of that. I think that's an excellent point.
I have a different kind of question. Not so much about immigration and admission, but about two personalities that really made a difference in the history of American Jewry. They're both Columbia products. I have in mind Felix Adler and the student Mordechai Cutler. So here we have two very different approaches to what to do about American Judaism, and you end up product of the same institution. So.
Well, I mean, so I've presented this before, and people say, why didn't they just apply to different, like to the University of Chicago or to this? They could not afford to not live at home, right? So I want to just emphasize, they could only afford to go to college if they lived at home. So that is why they are only applying in New York, and that is why CUNY becomes what it does. The City College of New York has more Nobel Prize winners from its undergraduate population than any university in America, okay, from this period. So it's important just that's why they are not well off. But I think in many ways, Felix Adler and Mordechai Kaplan raise, this is a very heightened environment where Jews, even if they are a large percentage, are hyper aware that they are not so welcome. And thinking of Felix Adler and Mordechai Kaplan are two different solutions for what it means. How are you Jewish in America? How do you fit in and be both a very good American and continue being Jewish, and what that takes? So maybe not everyone knows. You can Google Felix Adler and Mordechai Kaplan and understand what they're saying. But Columbia is at the center because a lot of the transformation of New York. And that, it becomes this concentration of Jews who are heavily interested in higher education. Yeah.
Are there documents that show any Jewish communal responses
To
to
Cephalod
any of these things that you're showing here?
So Cephalod Junior College, there are great documents. So this is the point. Columbia says that they are giving opportunity to people who don't have opportunity for education. So that's Columbia's response. What happens is it's 1928 to 1936, but it really closes in 1935. That's the last class because Brooklyn College opens in 1935. And Brooklyn College is in Brooklyn, right? So let's just say you don't want to travel so far, and it's free.
Was there like a Jewish welfare board in New York then that was like able to?
Yes, but they were not. Okay. So the people who are saying it are the alumni because they keep reaching out to them. But this is an interesting, and now I'm going to tell you why I'm writing it. It's not part of Columbia's history at all. There are like 5 books on Columbia's history. No one knows about Seplo Junior College. And if we don't understand Seplo Junior College, we can't understand questions of understanding, you know, diversity, testing, interviews, certain groups that are more wanted than other groups. These are questions which are persisting, but which began in this period. And the solution, right, that they're literally sweeping under the carpet, right, that was only 8 years, really says a lot about thinking through not just Columbia, but American higher education. Yeah.
Another question to move it for a little bit later. 1968, Columbia is the center.
All right. So you know what? You got me to my last slides. Okay. So I'm gonna get this is we're moving beyond Seplo. Okay, we end there. Okay, so this is in 1959. So in 1960, for the class of 1964, Columbia hires a new dean of admissions, David Dudley. David Dudley was at MIT, and he is a numbers guy. And he says, you know what? We're doing a new way of admittance. We're just doing the highest test scores and the highest grades. And most of the students it's still commuter. The class is 70% Jewish, and he loses his job 1 year. Okay? Because of these questions of what I'm saying to you, right? We don't want everyone, it's not only about test scores or grades. That's not the class we want. But it's important then to think about, and you're now at 68. So this is Mark Rudd. Okay, I have interviewed a lot of the 68ers. Okay, so people know what happened at Columbia in 68. Okay, at Columbia in 1968, there are protests throughout higher education against the war, Vietnam War, right? But at Columbia, it takes a certain form in which they take over half the buildings, right? Or not half the buildings. They take over 5 of the buildings and won't leave. And the police have to there's like thousands of students, and the police are called in and beat them up. And after that, Columbia is totally reconfigured, right? Because the faculty is so angry that the president called in the police who beat up the police were called in at like 2 a.m., right? And they beat up the students, and it makes Columbia very mad. And now there's this new Columbia has a Senate which shares authority. It's actually all been brought up for question how much power that university's Senate has in the last 2 years, right? Because they were supportive of the protests and the encampments and other. So we're still seeing the story play out. All right. But Mark Rudd, and you can see the picture. This is the picture of he's the head of SDS, the Students for Democratic Society, right? That organized the protests. He said that of the 2 groups involved, the African American students and the other students, basically it was 80% Jewish students who were involved in the protests. So it's important to understand, there's a long legacy, right? They were outraged that Columbia was working with the government on doing research for weapons, the different types of issues. There was about the gym. We can talk about it, but it's important to understand the different groups. And the way Mark Rudd said it to me, he said, we were not going to be like our parents and stand by as a population was being killed. And we decided we had to protest. And if it meant we had to take over buildings, we would do that. But we were not going to stand by like our parents. So that is an internal Jewish discussion about understanding how to respond to World War II that is playing out in 68. Yes.
In this whole time period, were there still certain percentage of Jews in Columbia?
Yeah.
And how were they separated? How were they accepted versus what remember that not was a was composite. Which was the stores, which you said there are lots of by stores. Well, what was the factor?
So you know that universities admissions is this big opaque thing that no one understands exactly what works. So it's very interesting with the Dudley, he was very clear what he was accepting on. When you interview people from 60, so I interviewed people who were at Columbia from 63 to 69. So in the class of 64, the way they would insult each other is they would say, you're a Dudley's Folly. You're not a real Columbia's man. Meaning you're just here because you have these great grades. But I'm here, right? Because I came from the right school. I'm the right type of leader, whatever it is, background. I mean, the big breakdown is where you were from in New York City. but it's important to understand in the mid-60s, right, with the Civil Rights Act, Columbia starts accepting from public schools all over from Newark and New Jersey. That's why there are that's why there are African American students on campus. Columbia does have a commitment to accept from public schools, which actually other members of the Ivy League in their elite pursuit for elite don't often take from public schools as much as Columbia. All right. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Well, can I ask another question, which is to bring us back to the October 7 Conan Virtual say. Can you say something about the relationship between the faculty and the administration, upper administration of Columbia? I taught at Columbia in the 1980s. Even then, there were serious issues, which probably in a place like ASU, those issues do not exist. So can you comment on management? Maybe it's politically incorrect for you to do so in public, but if you can, what can we learn from the way things were managed?
Rebecca, do you want to sit and then we can start?
Yes. Yes. Okay. Yes. So just
She's going to answer that question. We're going to have to sit down so they can start serving the food, and then we can continue this conversation while we're eating because they want to serve the food.
okay. Thank you. So what I would just say is that it was a perfect storm at Columbia because it was a new president. October 7th, she was inaugurated 3 days before, installed, and she was not from America. But there's always been, I would say, not tension. It's a total chaotic mess because there's 17 schools. They all have their own deans. They all have their own agendas in some ways. The medical school, it's unclear how it relates, right, to the university. So it's always been a little disorganized. It's very disorganized. It's unclear. Unclear of authority in Colombia. There are enormous issues of authority, and it's not well organized. It's not clear what the president should do, what a dean should do, who should be. So let's just say an example after October 7th, right? The dean of one of the undergraduate programs at the College of General Studies sent out a message, but everyone wanted the president to send out a message, and she didn't see it as her responsibility. The deans should send out a message to their students. It's not clear lines of organization. I wouldn't even say authority. We always say this. I'll just say it openly. Working at Columbia is like working in the Soviet Union. You have no idea how things operate, who you actually have to talk to, how to get something done. You have to talk to this apparatchik or, other people talk about it as being Byzantine in higher education. Okay, not in ASU, but Columbia is a very diffuse place, and it's unclear, what people's responsibilities are.
They contribute to
Yes, and I also think that the new she's not the president anymore. The new president didn't know what to do.
Where is she from? You said
She's England. She's from England. She's an economist from England who then ran the London School of Economics. But I don't think she understood, she actually said once she didn't come to Columbia to discipline students. And actually, sometimes you have to discipline students. So that was not her approach. And she left. I think she realized that this was not speaking to her strengths. We then had another president. Then we had an interim president. We've had, where we are because, there hasn't been real leadership. I mean, that's the other part of higher education. If you have real leadership, problems, if are addressed early on, don't become problems. So, all right, I'm going to sit down. Any other questions? Sorry, I gave a lot, but I think that this is,